today we are going to talk about the distributed web. And a big thing is that we're going to talk through is that this is actually bigger than blockchain or a blockchain or the blockchain. It's kind of what we're going to land. But before we get into it, what is the distributed web? Let's just define it quickly before jumping in. So what it is it's a set of emerging protocols, networks, and new infrastructure that makes the web itself safer, faster, and more open. And it's enabling novel economic systems, and it's allowing people to connect in new ways. So just kind of like take that, set that as the context, and in we go. So let's have a little walk down memory lane if this whole distributed web thing seems like it's kind of amorphous and you don't know what it is. Remember that not too long ago, this is how people saw the internet. So this is the Today Show in 1994.
Back now at 56 past, I wasn't prepared to translate that as I was doing that little tease.
Oh, that's
that little mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At?
See, that's what I said. Mm-hmm. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard it. I'd never heard it said. I'd always seen the mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
I heard be around big fight up in the lunchroom the other week.
There it is. Violence at NBC. GE com. I mean.
Well, Allison should know.
What is internet anyway?
Yeah, that. What is internet anyway? It is literally, so we're in this kind of same space today. Like where the distributed web is today is where the internet was at in 1994. And I know that's kind of a bombastic claim, but we'll see why I think that is. So in 94, you had AOL and Netscape. Those were like household names. And Google and Amazon they didn't exist, right? And literally today, we're asking the same questions of what is a blockchain? Like, do you write to it? How do you do these basic things? And so it's like Tim was saying earlier, like the next Googles and Amazons are going to exist, and they don't yet, and they're going to come out of this ecology. And another important thing to kind of recognize about what emerged out of this is that the Googles and Amazons emerged out of the imaginations of people who understood what the internet was fundamentally. They just weren't looking at certain things, but they understood it deeply. So the question that we find ourselves asking is, how do we get ourselves on the inside of this change to see it from the inside out and to really understand it? So the way we're going to do that is by first getting our bearings together. So we're going to use the lens of cryptocurrency market cap as we all know dollars, so let's use that as our way to jump in. So the year's 2013, about 4 years ago, and the entire cryptocurrency market cap is about 142 million, M as in million, dollars. Really, no Fortune 500 companies are engaging with this technology. It's kind of out there. There are no countries that are involved with it. It's not an international thing at all. And in terms of technologies, the only technology that is really widely known and used is Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain. So that's that. You fast forward just to today, and the entire market cap is now 136 B, as in $1 billion. That's as of yesterday. Could be more or less today. Every Fortune 500 company that has a technology arm or group is working with or engaging with these technologies in some way, in-house. Countries, nations are engaging with these things. You have China that tries to ban Bitcoin. That's like the headline. Not exactly like that, but it's happening. The Estonian government is doing their citizenship registration on a blockchain. And the technologies they're just too numerous to kind of run through in one talk. So that's like we have a Cambrian explosion of things right now. And so we're really on the left side of this curve that's happening. We don't even know how far on the left we are or what the size is. But this is really big territory over here. And so a question starts to emerge, and it's what is implied when these numbers reach into the trillions? Yeah, interesting. You can also say there's a lot of speculation here. Like, hey, how can you be assured that these things are going to get into the trillions? What's going to make sure this thing continues? So yeah, there is some speculation. But the point is, there's also some imagination. We have to use our imagination. There's a really good question earlier. I forget who asked it, but it was like, if the mind is linear, well, then the imagination is nonlinear. And it takes a mixing of both of these things to see this. So yeah, let's move forward. In order to answer or approach approach the last question that we asked of, what's the implication, we first need to understand that the distributed web is bigger than just the blockchain. We need to understand what it is. So what it's about is it's about peer-to-peer networks, new ways of connecting people. It's also about these new types of ledgers. We hear blockchain, but we'll talk a little bit about more of these things. These new ledgers allow us to track ownership and create value in new ways. It's about entirely new economic system possibilities, things that we haven't been able to do for millennia, thousands of years, we can now do today as a result of these things. And the thing that enables all of this is new types of trustless protocols. So these protocols, ways of doing things, ways of connecting things, they're starting to step in and slowly play the role that large institutions and governments have historically played. And they're essentially playing the role of allowing people to organize and coordinate to achieve shared goals on a massive scale, which is kind of what the other things used to do. And so what's happening is the internet is being rewritten from the inside out. It's happening from the inside out. So you need to be on the inside to see it. You can't just look from the outside in and quite understand it. And what it's fundamentally about is connecting and organizing people in new ways. So with all that, there's another question that shows up. Is all this movement really an improvement? And the answer in blue here for people that are in the back is, if you think that honeypot removal and uncensorable communication, high network resilience, and faster content delivery are improvements, then yes, this is an improvement. So to be specific with honeypot removal, we're all familiar with data breaches. So you had Equifax most recently, you had Target and Yahoo. We could go through the list, but these networks make it possible to distribute information across broad swaths of time and space to make honeypots and these types of breaches a thing of the past. It will happen. Uncensorable communication channels. Things like the Great Firewall of China, you can almost turn these walls into Swiss cheese with these types of things. So they're a security nightmare, but they're also enablers of entirely new things. One of the things it enables is these highly resilient networks. There are more paths for information to move through. And the reason for that is that the nodes that play a role in these networks can now be incentivized economically in new ways that have never before been possible. And then finally, there is faster delivery of information. So when milliseconds mean billions, edges of networks matter. And what nodes serve what things and where they serve it from these are things that have only been able to be used by companies like Google and Amazon in the past internally. Because keep in mind, the largest companies in the world, all their architectures inside are distributed. We're just taking the things that have been inside for a while and now moving them into the broader context because we can now. But we can now leverage these things as individuals and as people in smaller companies. So yeah, it is an improvement. And so let's look at a few examples of what's happening in the space, because the space it's big, and the scope of what it's trying to accomplish is fairly impressive. So IPFS is on the left here. This stands for the Interplanetary File System. It's a throwback to the 60s to the IPN, which was the Interplanetary Network, which was what became the internet. Yeah, there's a lot of history here. It goes back decades. We're kind of looking backwards, actually, to go forwards. But IPFS is aiming to replace HTTP, which is the main protocol of the web. And IPFS addresses how you find content in this space. And so when you change the way you find things in a space, you actually change the space itself. So it's very aggressive, but it's actually happening. It's mass adoption in the last couple of years. This middle one, Link, stands for a company called Chainlink, and they are springing up to address the question of, when you remove these centralized sources of truth, so what is the price of this stock? What is the temperature here? Did this sensor fire? Did this network of actuators do a thing? And can I provably know that's true? Well, you need a network of oracles that will fulfill the source of truth, so that you can kind of zero in on and triangulate the truth. And so that's what Chainlink is. And then this third one, this third one is interesting because we're all here, and the buzzword is blockchains. Yeah, blockchains are great. And this idea, but blockchains are really about distributed truth, sharing truth across large swaths of space. We can all agree on the truth and not have to ask one person. DAGs stands for Directed Acyclic Graph, and these are data structures that are emerging. They've been around for a little while, but they sit side by side with blockchains. And what's interesting about them is that some of their strengths are the biggest weaknesses of blockchains. So where you might spam a blockchain with a lot of transactions, or basically the way you would attack a blockchain actually becomes a thing that speeds a DAG up. It can increase the throughput and the network resilience of this thing. So yeah, so don't worry if you're like nervous about blockchains. We're already living in the post-blockchain world. It's great. But yeah, these are three of those things that are kind of making waves. And so with all of this, what we need, and this is what we're doing at the CoLab right now, is we need to go from systems breaking to sense making, and we need a way to make sense of all the things that are emerging across this landscape. And that's what we've been doing and are now in a new space of defining with the blockchain and distributed web portfolio area. So with Nomad, we kind of started working with a couple of projects, and with some of our work with other projects in the distributed space like Augur, we've become really good at working with, there's a handful of these teams around the world. It's not a ton of them. And the most brilliant people in the space you can actually connect with and work side by side with to work on these projects. And so we've become really good at that. Because while a lot of these projects are very focused in their silo, and they should be, they need to be, there are not a lot of people who are saying, we're going to take an umbrella look at all of this, and we're going to build relationships with all these people, and then kind of track and make sense of things and share the learnings broadly and step out of the silo. So it's really a new form of exploration, and it's a how-to that we are learning and becoming a part of and sharing. We're kind of in the midst of it right now. And so how do we do that? We do that, the actions are on this side, so I'll go here, through participation. We are going to participate, and we are participating in some of these networks. So we are actors in these things actively. We run nodes in these networks, and we share the learnings openly across projects and with people that we work with. Contribution takes on a very hands-on feel here, because you need to write code or build applications, design use cases at many different levels, whether it's at the core library level, we can get in there and get our hands dirty, or if it's at the level of application and tool chain, which sits slightly above it, which is where IDEO is historically just wonderful there. It's the human piece. Code is code, but then you have to interact with those things. So across that entire stack is where we play. And then finally, kind of what I touched on is aggregation. There's really not a lot of people aggregating the learnings in this space. There's a lot of dogma. And so who are the people who are best situating themselves to aggregate and track and qualify what's meaningful across the entire space? So that's kind of our actions. And what that allows us to understand and to create are these new types of business models. Like mentioning oracles earlier, that's a new business model that will be emerging. It doesn't really exist yet. Governance models. Governance of code and governance as code is a distinction that will become increasingly important over the next 5 and 10 years. Something that hasn't really hit the public conversation yet. So governance is really important. How do you update and move these things forward? And when these things, as protocols, move billions and eventually trillions of dollars around, that question becomes really important. I mean, yeah. And so then also understanding network properties. So what are the properties of these things? And yeah, like I said, we're like really uniquely positioned for this because like Joe and Matt have been saying it for years, but it's networked innovation. Well, this is the innovation of networks itself. We're like right there. And we have to get in there and build things. Like I said, you can't see it from the outside in. And so let's go back to this question now of what is implied when these numbers reach into the trillions. And the answer is systemic change. I know it's kind of obvious, but it's kind of fun to just say, yeah, systemic change. It's there on the board here. And the reason why we have to get involved and get our hands dirty now is because it's not a time to follow. We have to get involved and shape this because it's so early that we can. You can actually make the thing that involves a handful of people and then touches billions of dollars in value and millions to billions of lives in the next 5 and 10 years. You can't do that's. There's not a lot of ecosystems that enable that. And so then why must we act? It's not me just saying this. So how do we know? And there's a parallel that I really like. It's from a paper in the 1975 financial journal called The Loser's Game. And The Loser's Game is written by a guy named Charles Ellis. And in this paper, basically he's making the argument for why financial management should be passive in the 70s and why it's went from this, but that's the point. But in this paper, there's a study by a guy named Dr. Simon Ramo, and he studied tennis. And he realized that in tennis, there is actually 2 games of tennis. And he started looking at how players score points, and he found out that in the game of tennis, there is the winner's game and the loser's game. And the winner's game of tennis is the game that is played by professionals, and professionals win points. What they're doing is positioning themselves and their bodies and the ball, and they are winning points actively. They are taking the risk, and they are doing the action to win the point. Whereas anybody who is not a professional is playing the loser's game, and the way they lose games is by trying to do things, but they're making lots of mistakes. And so really, the loser's game is about risk aversion. Try to lose less points than the other person playing the loser's game. And if you're not a professional and you realize you're playing the loser's game, you'll probably win more games. So delineating these games is actually an important thing. And the point, the punchline here is that we are in this ecosystem. It's a winner's game right now. It is the time to take risks. It is the time to do things that are not backwards looking, but actually forwards looking, because this is that domain. So yeah, let's go play the winner's game. So moving forward, this is kind of a fun thought that's written. His name was Marty Bent. But in just 10 years, there won't be an 18-year-old on Earth who lived in a world without Bitcoin. Yeah, that's a big one. They're going to have this set of expectations of how the world operates, which are completely different than any of ours. This came into being, mid or late in our lives, which is interesting. So there's a generation of network natives that has different assumptions of how the world operates, and these 18-year-olds are going to be just as comfortable with public and private keys and security as we are now with the @ symbol in email. Remember that video where you're saying, what's the @ symbol? GECOM, right? Now it's you just send an email, right? And these kids are going to be the same way with all of the things that are very obtuse to us. So that's a powerful thing to recognize. And so in closing, I guess that's my point, is that it's a winner's game right now. And so that's what we're going to do, is we're going to go play this together. So that's the distributed web space. And now I think I'm handing it over to Dan to do a little intro here.
Thank you, Gavin. Let's go around with applause.